She showed up before sunrise, ready to lead. 3 officers surrounded her, mocked her ID, and threatened to arrest her. They didn't ask her name. They didn't check her title. They just saw a black woman who didn't belong. What they didn't know, what the cameras caught, was that she was about to become their new chief. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The sun was barely up when Sarah Johnson pulled her silver sedan into the parking lot of the Riverside Police Department. The sky was still streaked with pale lavender and gold, the streets quiet except for the occasional dog walker or delivery truck passing in the distance. Her tires crunched gently over gravel as she eased into a space near the side entrance. This wasn't the main public lot. It was the lot reserved for sworn officers and administrative staff, the ones who belonged. She turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and sat still for a few seconds. She reached over to the passenger seat and picked up her black leather folder. Inside it were her credentials, appointment letter, and her badge, newly issued but heavy with the weight of 2 decades in law enforcement. Sarah opened the folder, checked everything for the 3rd time, then closed it and slipped it under her arm. Her hands were steady, her face unreadable, but her mind was racing. This was it, her first day as chief of police. 20 years in military policing. A spotless record, 3 departments, countless sacrifices, and now, this. She stepped out of the car. Her black blazer was tailored and sharp, paired with dark slacks and low heels. No uniform yet. That would come later. She wanted to make her entrance on her terms. Let the room see her for who she was, before the badges and stars told them what to think. Her heels tapped softly on the pavement as she walked toward the entrance. Chin up, posture straight, heart pounding beneath an armor of calm. She didn't make it 20 feet before a voice snapped through the morning air. "Hey, stop right there." The words were hard and immediate, slicing through the quiet like a siren. Sarah turned slowly. 3 officers were walking toward her from the other end of the lot, clearly on edge. The one in front was tall and broad, mid-40s, with sharp shoulders and a sharper glare. His right hand hovered too close to his sidearm. His name tag read Stevens. Officer Mike Stevens. The name was familiar, but the face wasn't. "This is a restricted area," Stevens barked, closing the distance quickly. "You need to move along." Sarah didn't flinch. She held her ground, folding her hands calmly in front of her. "I'm here for work," she said evenly. Behind Stevens, 2 more officers approached. One was a short, blunt-faced woman, Officer Lisa Chen. The other was younger, maybe late 20s, thin build, dark hair. Officer Dave Miller. Miller looked unsure from the moment he stepped into view. His eyes flicked from Sarah to Stevens to the building, but he stayed silent. Chen squinted at Sarah like she was a puzzle missing too many pieces. She stepped forward with a scoff. "Sweetheart," Chen said with a forced smile. "If you're here to file a complaint or report something, you'll need to use the front entrance. This one's for staff only." Sarah replied, calm and precise. "I am staffed." Stevens took another step closer, eyes narrowing. His hand stayed just above his belt. "What kind of staff?" he asked. "Civilian? Custodial? Admin? Because you're not dressed like any officer I know." Sarah reached into the inside pocket of her blazer and pulled out her folder. She opened it slowly and held it up. Her badge gleamed faintly in the early morning light. Her name was clearly printed on her credentials. "Chief of Police, Sarah Johnson. Here's my ID." Stevens barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "Yeah, nice try. You really think we haven't seen fake badges before?" Chen crossed her arms and laughed under her breath. "That's a good one. You go on Etsy or something? It's almost believable." Sarah didn't move, didn't argue. She simply held the folder where it could be seen and said, "It's real." Stevens stepped closer again, now only a few feet from her. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to back away from the building. You're impersonating a police officer and trespassing on department property. That's a felony in this state. If you don't walk away right now, you're getting arrested." "Are you sure you want to do this?" Sarah asked quietly. Her voice was so steady it cut through their aggression like steel. Miller shifted behind them. He looked at Sarah, really looked, for the first time. Something about her didn't sit right. Not wrong, but different. Not a threat, not a stranger. Just someone who didn't fit what he'd been expecting. But he said nothing. Stevens shot him a warning glance. Miller stayed put. Chen took a step forward. "We're not playing games here." Sarah closed her folder, returned it to her jacket, and looked at all three officers. Her eyes didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or argue. She simply said, "I haven't done anything wrong." Stevens scowled. "You're refusing a lawful order. That's obstruction." "Do you treat all women like this?" she asked, "or just the black ones?" That hit like a punch. Chen's smirk faltered. Stevens' face went red. Miller looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. "You better watch your mouth," Stevens hissed. Sarah didn't move. She turned back toward the staff entrance, walking at the same calm, deliberate pace she had started with. Her posture didn't change. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her steps were even and assured. Behind her, Stevens shouted, "Hey! Don't you walk away from me!" Sarah didn't stop. Stevens reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a possible 1062 female suspect refusing orders, claiming to be stabbed." A voice crackled in return, but Sarah didn't hear it. She was already at the door. She tapped the access panel. The door clicked, and it opened. She stepped inside without looking back. The door closed behind her with a soft metallic thud. It was a small sound, but in the tension of that parking lot, it landed like a gunshot. Stevens stood frozen, staring at the door. Chen turned to him. "Did she just—" "I don't know how she had access," Stevens said. "Probably some old code, or she followed someone in yesterday." Miller was still watching the door. His stomach felt tight. "Didn't feel right," he muttered. "What didn't?" Stevens snapped. Miller hesitated. "I don't know, just something about her." "Yeah," Chen said. "She was lying. You saw that phony badge." Stevens nodded, already in damage control mode. "We'll check surveillance, file the report. If she's who she says she is, fine, but if not, she's going down for impersonation." Across the lot, unnoticed by any of them, the man with the dog had stopped walking. He held his phone at chest level, still recording. He had captured every word, every threat, every insult. And now, the world would see it too. Because in less than an hour, that video would be posted online, and by noon it would have over 100,000 views. But for now, the lot was quiet again. Stevens walked back toward the building, furious. Chen muttered something under her breath, and Miller stayed behind for a moment longer. He looked at the closed door, then up at the morning sky. Something about that woman, her presence, her silence, her certainty. He didn't know who she was, but deep down, he had a feeling. They'd just made a very big mistake. The fluorescent lights in the main briefing room flickered slightly as officers filed in, one after another. The room, usually half-full for morning patrol updates, was now completely packed. Rows of metal chairs were filled with uniformed officers, detectives in plain clothes, clerical staff, even night shift officers who should have been off duty by now. There was no clear reason for the all-hands call, no notice posted on the board, no whispers in advance, just a sudden message over the department PA. All personnel to the main briefing room, mandatory attendance, now. The tension in the room was unmistakable. It hummed beneath the idle chatter, the way everyone shifted in their seats, trying to look casual while their eyes darted around, searching for clues. In the back row, Officer Dave Miller sat with his arms folded tightly across his chest, his back straight. He hadn't said a word since arriving. His mind kept flashing back to the woman in the parking lot, the one they'd dismissed, the one they tried to push out, the one who, somehow, had opened the door like she had every right in the world to be there. Across the room, Officer Lisa Chen sat 2 rows in front of him, legs crossed, whispering to Officer Brian Feldman beside her. Her voice was casual but low, like she was spinning the morning's events into a story she could control. "Some woman tried to sneak in through the staff door," she was saying, "probably trying to get attention. Stevens had to threaten arrest to get her to back off." Near the front, Mike Stevens sat stone-faced, hands clenched together, tapping one thumb against the other. He hadn't spoken since walking into the room, hadn't cracked a joke, hadn't even made eye contact, just sat, staring at the front wall like it owed him an explanation. Something about the way that woman walked through the entrance. Something about the access code working. Something about how she hadn't hesitated. He didn't know what it meant, but the sinking feeling in his gut was growing heavier by the minute. The door at the front of the room opened. Conversation stopped like a switch had been flipped. Silence dropped over the room as the woman from the parking lot walked in. Only now she wasn't in a blazer. She was in full uniform. Navy blue pressed sharp at every edge, gold stars glinting from each collar, department badge polished to a shine on her chest, a service ribbon row that told a longer story than anyone in that room could read at a glance. Her boots struck the floor with authority, each step measured, unapologetic. Her nameplate read, Johnson. Chief S. Johnson. The room didn't breathe. Chen's mouth fell open. Stevens sat frozen. Miller exhaled so quietly he almost didn't notice he'd been holding his breath. Sarah Johnson stopped at the front of the room and scanned the sea of faces in front of her. Some curious, some confused, many already looking like they'd regretted everything they'd done that morning. She let the silence stretch for a beat longer. Then she spoke. "Good morning." Her voice carried with calm command, not forced, not raised. Just the sound of someone who had already earned every ounce of respect that hadn't yet been given. "I'm Chief Sarah Johnson. As of today, I'm the new commanding officer of the Riverside Police Department." There was a brief shuffle of movement as some officers straightened instinctively in their seats. "I know this wasn't what most of you were expecting. That's okay. Change rarely is." She paused, then continued. "Let me tell you who I am. 20 years in uniform. Started as a military police officer in the Army. Served 2 tours. Spent 5 years as a city detective. 3 more as a special investigator. Promoted to captain, then deputy chief, now chief. She looked at the front row, where Stevens sat motionless, eyes locked straight ahead. "I've commanded riot teams, negotiated hostage situations, led internal investigations. I've testified before state commissions. I've trained new recruits and helped rewrite department policy in 2 jurisdictions." She stepped closer to the podium. "So no, I didn't just fall into this job. I didn't get here because of politics. I didn't get here because of a quota. I didn't get here because of optics." Her eyes locked with Stevens. "I got here because I earned it." She let that sit in the room, let it sink. Somewhere in the back, a throat cleared nervously. Someone else shifted in their chair. "I know I may not look like the kind of chief you're used to. I know I may not look like some of you expected. And I know that earlier this morning there were officers right here in this room who saw me walking into this building and assumed I didn't belong." Her voice didn't tremble, it sharpened. "They questioned my ID. They threatened to arrest me. One placed his hand on his weapon. Another laughed in my face." Chen blinked and looked away. Stevens' jaw locked tight. Sarah didn't break eye contact. They didn't ask for my name. They didn't ask for clarification. They just assumed, based on how I looked, based on the clothes I wore, based on what I didn't fit in their minds. She stepped out from behind the podium now, walking forward slightly, closing the distance between herself and the first few rows. "Let's not pretend this is new. Let's not pretend that assumptions like these don't happen all the time in this department, in every department." A few heads turned subtly. A few eyes dropped to the floor. She didn't slow down. "I want to be clear about something, absolutely clear. What happened to me this morning is what happens to civilians every single day. And if your own chief can't walk through the door without being profiled and threatened, then what chance does an ordinary citizen have? The room was silent. Every officer was listening now. I wasn't treated like a chief. I wasn't treated like a colleague. I was treated like a problem. And you know what? I'm not here to be your problem. I'm here to be your leader. Sarah turned slightly to address more of the room. I didn't come here to play gotcha. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. But I will not ignore what happened. I will not excuse it. Because if we excuse that behavior among ourselves, we have no moral standing to police this community. None. She returned to the front of the room. I've read the department records. I know the complaints. I've seen the numbers. We've got a trust problem with this community, a real one. And part of it is because we have a trust problem within our own walls. Miller was nodding now, slowly. A few others were too. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her tone low, direct. Some of you will question my authority, not because I haven't earned it, not because I haven't served, but because of what I look like. She paused. Let me say this once. Her words dropped like stone into still water. If you can't respect your own chief, how can you expect this community to respect you? The room was so quiet, it felt suspended in time. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the officers who had arrived indifferent were now glued to every word. Sarah pulled in a breath and took one final step forward. I'm not asking for your friendship. I'm not asking for blind loyalty. I'm asking for professionalism, for integrity, for the same thing this badge asks of all of us. She tapped the badge pinned to her uniform. Because from this moment forward, this department is going to change. Not with slogans, not with press conferences, with actions, with accountability, with leadership. Her voice softened, but only slightly. And if that's not what you signed up for, I suggest you reconsider whether this is the right place for you. She straightened her shoulders and gave one final look across the room. I'll be meeting with each unit individually this week, but for now, briefing's over. Return to duty. She turned and walked out the door. Behind her, 48 officers sat in silence. Some ashamed, some stunned, some finally ready to listen. Sarah stood once again at the front of the briefing room. Most of the officers had not moved since her last words. Some still sat in silence, stunned by what had just unfolded. Others were fidgeting in their seats, shifting uncomfortably. Stevens had not looked up once. Chen stared at the floor, jaw set. Miller's eyes, though, stayed on Sarah, his brow tense, the muscles in his jaw working. Sarah opened a leather folder she'd brought in with her and pulled out a photo. It was framed, simple, and worn. She held it up high enough for those in the front rows to see. "This," she said quietly, "is my brother, Officer Marcus Johnson." The room hushed even more, if that was possible. Sarah walked slowly along the front of the room, holding the photo. In it, Marcus wore his academy uniform. He looked young, proud, and full of hope. He was smiling with the same kind of determination Sarah carried in her eyes. Marcus joined the force when he was 24. He didn't do it for the paycheck. He didn't do it because someone pushed him. He did it because he wanted to help people. He believed in the badge, believed in the oath, just like many of you did when you started. She returned to the center, holding the photo in both hands. He was good at his job. He responded to every call with urgency, treated every person, whether they were in cuffs or crying on the sidewalk, with dignity. Never missed a shift, never drew his weapon unnecessarily, never had a single complaint filed against him. She paused for a breath, until the day he saw something he wasn't supposed to talk about. Officers leaned in slightly, some stared, some sat still, eyes down as if bracing for what was coming. He was riding with another officer, someone more senior. They responded to a call about a young black man allegedly trespassing behind a gas station. The suspect was already in handcuffs when they arrived. On the ground, no threat, not resisting. Sarah looked around the room. Her tone stayed calm, but her eyes carried the weight of something much older, much deeper. The senior officer kept hitting him, kicked him, called him names. Marcus tried to intervene, told him to stop, filed a report, gave a statement. She let the silence drag. And that's when everything changed. Miller leaned forward slightly. Sarah caught his expression. He knew what she was about to say. Or maybe he had seen pieces of it before from a distance and had never spoken up. Suddenly, his backup started arriving late. His reports were questioned. Minor mistakes got blown up into disciplinary threats. He was excluded from squad briefings, passed over for promotion, told he wasn't team-oriented. Her jaw tensed. They didn't fire him. They didn't need to. They isolated him until he had no choice but to leave. They made it clear he didn't belong, not because he broke the law, but because he refused to break his oath. She returned to the podium and placed the photo down carefully. I tell you this because I need you to understand what culture like that does, not just to one officer, but to everyone. When silence is rewarded and integrity is punished, we stop being protectors. We become a threat to the very people we swore to serve. She looked out over the room. And I didn't take this job just to carry a title. I took it to finish what my brother started. There was nothing performative in her voice, no theatrics, just a cold, deliberate truth spoken into a room full of people who had been complicit, confused, or quiet. Some looked ashamed. A few looked inspired. Others, Stevens among them, just looked angry. Sarah didn't blink. She kept going. I know some of you have seen things you didn't agree with. Maybe you spoke up. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you told yourself it wasn't your place, or it wasn't your fight, or it would blow over. But I'm here to tell you something plainly. Her voice sharpened just slightly. The problem isn't just the bad officers. It's the silence. She stepped forward again. It's the silence when someone says something inappropriate and no one speaks up. It's the silence when excessive force happens and everyone turns away. It's the silence when one of your own shows bias and nobody checks them. That silence is complicity. She looked around again. Her gaze landed briefly on Miller, who lowered his eyes but didn't look away. It's not always the big things. Sometimes it's the small ones, the casual remarks, the reports that get adjusted, the body cameras that conveniently stop working, the judgment calls that lean just a little too hard in one direction. Sarah paused and let her words settle. If we allow that, we're no better than the officers who openly abuse their power. Because what we permit, we promote. What we ignore, we become. She walked back toward the podium. I know speaking up is hard. I know it comes with consequences. I watched what it did to Marcus. I watched it cost him his career, his pension, his sense of purpose. Her voice dipped into something deeper. But do you know what it didn't cost him? She looked around the room slowly. His integrity. The room was dead quiet. Marcus left that department with his honor intact, and I carry that legacy now. I carry it into every room I walk into, including this one. She picked up a folder from the podium, flipping it open. And that's why, starting today, we're making changes, not just symbolic ones, real ones. Murmurs stirred in the back. Sarah raised her voice just enough to cut through. There will be body cameras for every officer, no exceptions. There will be accountability training, mandatory, not optional. There will be civilian oversight for complaint review, and there will be consequences for discrimination, abuse of authority, and dereliction of duty. She met their eyes again. This is not about punishing people. It's about restoring trust, not just in the public, but inside this room. She set the folder down and stepped forward one more time. If you're here to serve your community with fairness, empathy, and courage, I want you on this team. If you're here because you think the badge makes you untouchable, you're in the wrong department. Miller slowly straightened in his chair. Sarah's eyes swept over the room. Change is coming, and those who resist it will not last long here. That's not a threat. That's a promise. In the silence that followed, the room felt like it had shifted, like something old had cracked open, like something unspoken had finally been named. Sarah looked at the photo of Marcus one last time. I couldn't protect him, but I can protect the next one. The briefing ended. The officers rose, slowly, like they were waking up from something heavy. Some drifted toward the hallway in silence, eyes low. Others whispered to each other in tight knots, glancing at Sarah and then quickly away. Some looked angry, even defiant. Stevens pushed past his row, jaw locked, chest puffed. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't look at Sarah, just walked out stiffly, his boots echoing too loudly on the linoleum. Jen followed close behind, expression unreadable. In the back, Miller lingered. He hadn't moved from his chair. He watched the others go, then looked down at his hands. For the first time in a long time, they were shaking. Not from fear, from shame. And something else. Possibility. He stood slowly, walking toward the door. He glanced back once, not at Sarah, but at the photo of Marcus still resting on the podium. He didn't say a word, but something in his step had changed. And Sarah noticed. It started with a post that had no caption, just a video. The man walking his dog had uploaded it around 9:15 a.m., maybe an hour after Sarah's confrontation in the parking lot. He hadn't edited it. No filters, no music. Just raw, shaky footage of a black woman being surrounded by 3 officers. Their words, sharp and escalating. Her voice, calm and measured. The moment Stevens reached for his radio, the threat of arrest, the way she walked away, and then the door opening. That simple click as she disappeared inside. The man had posted it without even knowing who she was. All he'd written in the description was, "This happened at Riverside PD this morning. No idea who she is, but they treated her like a criminal." By noon, the post had been shared over 6,000 times. By 1 o'clock, local news reporters were scrambling to find out who the woman was. By 3, someone in the department leaked the truth. She wasn't a trespasser. She was Chief Sarah Johnson. The reaction came fast and loud. Twitter lit up. TikTok started remixing clips with audio overlays. On Facebook, people wrote essays in the comments, recalling times when they too had been dismissed, profiled, or talked down to. Instagram accounts turned stills from the video into digital posters, Sarah standing firm while Stevens yelled, with the caption, "She didn't flinch, she didn't bow, she just walked through the door like it was hers, because it was." Hashtags started trending. Chief Johnson, respect black leadership. Riverside PD. She belongs here. Some people were angry, some were just stunned, but most were inspired. And the comments kept coming. She handled that better than I ever could. This is why we need more women in leadership. This department is lucky she didn't turn around and sue. Imagine treating your new boss like she's a threat. Imagine how they treat the rest of us. The video hit a nerve. Not because it was flashy, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, because it was familiar, because it confirmed what too many already knew. The pain of being unseen, the danger of being misjudged, the strength it takes to remain calm when someone is trying to erase you. And in the middle of it all, Sarah said nothing publicly. She didn't post a statement, didn't comment, didn't hit share. She just kept working, until her phone rang. It was the mayor, Mayor Daniel Roberts. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Chief Johnson," he said, "we have a situation." Sarah sat behind her desk, watching the notifications blink across her department-issued laptop screen. News outlets, social media mentions, community alerts. She already knew what he was calling about. "I'm aware," she said. "This video," the mayor continued, his voice tight, "is spreading faster than we can control it. The city's inbox is flooded. Reporters are camped outside the building. We need to contain this." Sarah leaned back in her chair, steady. Contain what exactly? The fallout, he replied. We can't have a racial profiling scandal in our own backyard. Not with the budget talks next month. Not with the city council breathing down my neck. She didn't say anything. Just let him fill the silence. What I need from you, he went on, is to stay quiet. No public statements. No media appearances. We're handling this through the city's PR office. Let us manage the narrative. You focus on operations. Mayor Roberts, Sarah said calmly, what happened in that parking lot is the narrative. It's a misunderstanding. It was a threat, she corrected, from 3 of your officers, directed at their own chief. I'm not disputing the facts, he said quickly. I'm saying we can work this out internally. There's no need for this to become a national headline. It already is, she said. He paused. She could almost hear the sound of him massaging his temple, calculating how much political damage this would cause him. Not her, him. Then don't make it worse, he said finally. Don't add fuel to the fire. This city needs stability right now. No, Sarah said. What this city needs is accountability. Another pause. Chief, he said, I'm asking you to think about the big picture, your position, your future. Don't blow up your own department on your first day. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. If I have to burn down the rot to rebuild this place right, she said, I will. The line went silent. Then he hung up. The weight in the air around her didn't lift. But Sarah wasn't looking for relief. She was looking for the truth. And she was ready to speak it. By 5 o'clock, her team had scheduled an interview. Live, on the record. No scripts. No spin.
To Sarah. That evening, the local news station opened its 6 o'clock broadcast with a rare live segment. The anchor introduced the piece with urgency. Tonight, we're joined by Riverside's new Chief of Police, Sarah Johnson, after a video of her being confronted by her own officers has sparked nationwide discussion. Sarah sat calmly across from the interviewer, Amanda Patterson. She wore her full uniform, her medals and ribbons were visible, her posture was poised, her face showed no trace of nerves. Chief Johnson, Amanda began, thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. Let's start with the video. What happened that morning? Sarah didn't blink. I arrived at the department for my first day as chief. I wasn't in uniform. I was carrying identification. I approached the staff entrance. 3 officers stopped me. They demanded I leave. They accused me of impersonating a police officer. One of them placed his hand near his weapon. Another threatened arrest. You showed them your badge? I did. They didn't believe you. They didn't even look closely. Amanda paused before asking, what went through your mind in that moment? I thought about how many people go through the same thing without a badge, without the ability to open the door and walk inside. I thought about the people who get cuffed instead of questioned, the people who never get to say, you'll understand soon enough. There was a hush in the studio. Amanda leaned forward. Some are calling this a case of racial profiling. I think that's accurate, Sarah said. I think if I looked different, wore a different face, carried myself with a different history, they wouldn't have reacted the same. And now they know you're their boss. Yes, but the question is, what if I wasn't? The silence after that question was louder than any applause could have been. Amanda shifted. What are your next steps? I've already begun implementing new policies, accountability measures, culture reviews, reforms that this department desperately needs. And what about those officers? There will be an investigation, but I want to be clear, this isn't just about 3 people. It's about a culture that made them believe their actions were normal, acceptable, even justified. Amanda nodded slowly. What message do you have for the public who've watched this video and are now watching you? Sarah turned directly to the camera. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't tremble. I want you to know that I see you, that I've been where you are, doubted, dismissed, threatened for no reason other than existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong skin. She inhaled deeply. But I also want you to know that the system can change, that the people inside it can change, that justice isn't a myth. It's a choice, one we make every single day. She looked directly into the lens. And I promise you this, as long as I wear this badge, I will make that choice. The interview ended, and within the hour, it was everywhere, not just in Riverside, not just in California, but across the country, because Sarah hadn't just told her story. She had told theirs, and they were ready to rise with her.
Mayor Roberts called again the next morning. This time there was no pretense of diplomacy. His tone was clipped, his words carefully measured. Sarah answered the call from her office, arms folded, eyes on the clock. He didn't ask how she was doing, didn't mention the overwhelming support from the public. He went straight into what he called damage control. "Chief Johnson," he said, "we need to shift the tone." Meaning? Meaning this city is under a microscope, and what the public needs right now is stability, reassurance, unity. Sarah didn't answer. She'd heard this line before. In other departments, other cities, from other mayors who were less concerned with justice and more concerned with image. "You've made your point," he continued. "The interview was powerful, and yes, the community is rallying around you. But we can't keep throwing gasoline on the fire. We need to start calming things down." "You mean stop telling the truth?" "I mean tone it down," he said. "Start talking about healing, forgiveness, cooperation. We've got officers calling out sick, patrol routes are disrupted. We're 2 weeks from the next budget session, and the unions are already making noise." Sarah sat back. "I was appointed to lead this department, not coddle it." "You were appointed to keep this city safe," he said, "and right now you're stirring division." "You're confusing accountability with division," Sarah replied calmly. "If officers are uncomfortable because the culture of impunity is being questioned, maybe they should reconsider why they're in this job. You don't understand the political climate. No, Mayor, you don't understand the moral one." There was a pause. Then his voice dropped lower, slower. "Let me be clear, if this continues to escalate, if you keep bypassing PR, if you keep airing internal issues in public, the city council may start to question your leadership, and I won't be able to stop them if they push for a vote of no confidence." It was a subtle threat, wrapped in political concern, cloaked in concern for optics, but a threat nonetheless. Sarah didn't blink. "Then let them vote. I won't lead this department with my head down. I won't whisper when I'm supposed to roar." He sighed heavily. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "No," she said, "I'm making it honest." And she hung up. Less than a minute later her email pinged. Then pinged again, and again. And then her department phone lit up. They weren't from the mayor. They weren't from City Hall. They were from the public. Dozens, then hundreds. Messages of support flooding in like a tidal wave. Some short and simple. "Thank you for standing up." Others longer, filled with stories. Women who had been dismissed by officers, men who'd been profiled in their own neighborhoods, mothers who feared for their sons, grandparents who'd stopped trusting the police decades ago and now, for the first time, felt seen. There were videos from teenage girls saying they wanted to be police officers now, because of her. There were messages from veterans who said they'd served alongside women like her, and it was about time someone with that backbone wore the stars. And there were emails from civil rights leaders, from professors, from parents, from faith leaders, from people who didn't even live in Riverside but who saw what she did and felt hope ignite in places they didn't know were still alive. One message stood out. It was handwritten, scanned, and sent in an attachment. "Dear Chief Johnson, I don't know you, but I saw the video. I cried watching how you handled it. You never raised your voice, you never backed down. You didn't need to. I've spent 62 years on this earth being looked at like I don't belong. I've never once seen a black woman walk through the fire like you and come out holding the flame. Don't let them dim your light. We need you. Our daughters need you. With love and respect, Mrs. Eleanor Watkins, retired nurse. Sarah read that letter 3 times. Then she printed it and pinned it on the bulletin board behind her desk. At 11:23 a.m., there was a knock on her office door. When it opened, Officer Dave Miller stood there. His uniform was freshly pressed, but his eyes carried the same storm from the day before. "Chief," he said, "do you have a moment?" She nodded and gestured for him to come in. He stepped inside, shut the door, then stood in front of her desk like a student called to the principal's office. His posture was rigid, his hands were clasped behind his back. "I wanted to speak with you about the other morning, in the parking lot." She said nothing, letting him speak on his own terms. "I should have said something," he started. "I should have stepped between you and Stevens, or at least questioned what we were doing. I knew something was off, but I didn't speak up." He looked down at the floor. "I was scared. Not of you. Of him. Of how it would look. Of becoming a target. Stevens, he's been here a long time. People listen to him." Sarah watched him closely. He continued, "I joined this department because I believed in protecting people. But I've been here 3 years, and I've spent most of that time learning how to stay quiet. I thought that was the safest way to survive." He looked up now, eyes filled with guilt and something else. Need. A need to be more than he had been. "I'm sorry," he said, "for staying silent. I should have backed you up. I should have remembered who I am. I didn't, and I hate that." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You still can." Miller looked confused. "You still can speak up," she said. "You still can stand for what's right. You still have the chance to be the kind of officer you wanted to be when you signed up." He nodded, slowly, like the idea was sinking in for the first time. Sarah continued, "This job will give you 100 chances to do the wrong thing quietly, to protect your comfort, to maintain the illusion. But I need people who will choose right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Miller stood straighter. "I want to be one of those people." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Wanting is easy. Action is harder." He nodded again. She stood and walked around to the front of the desk. She wasn't towering over him. Sarah wasn't the kind of leader who needed elevation to assert power. She looked him in the eye, equal footing but full of purpose. "I'm going to give you a choice, Officer Miller." He held her gaze. "You can keep your head down. Keep following the ones who speak loudest, even when they're wrong. Or you can help me fix this place." His throat moved as he swallowed. "I want to help fix it." She nodded. "But don't make promises you can't keep. I don't need your pledge. I need your effort." "Yes, Chief." She pointed toward the window. "You see that?" she said. "That's a department on the edge of change. And inside it are officers watching, waiting to see who's going to step forward and who's going to fade into the background." Miller turned to look. Out there were his colleagues, some who respected Sarah now, some who resented her, some who weren't sure what to think. "You're going to be tested," she warned. "They'll call you names, they'll question your loyalty, they'll try to pull you back to what was comfortable, but you have to choose who you want to be." Miller took a breath. "I want to be the kind of cop I can tell my kids about someday." Sarah smiled, the first genuine one she'd shown all day. "Then don't prove it to me, prove it to yourself." He nodded and started to turn toward the door. As he reached for the handle, she added one last thing. "Do better tomorrow than you did yesterday." He paused, looked back, and nodded. "Yes, Chief." When the door closed behind him, Sarah sat back down. The room felt a little lighter, not because the battle was over, but because someone else had just picked up a sword. The morning after Sarah's televised interview, a tense fog lingered inside the walls of the Riverside Police Department. The usual chatter had thinned to whispers. Even the air in the break room felt heavier, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for someone else to speak first. Overnight, A line had been drawn, and no one wanted to admit which side they stood on. In one corner, officers Lisa Chen and Mike Stevens huddled with two other patrolmen, Jenkins and Alvarez, voices low, glances sharp. They didn't mention the video, but everyone knew what they were talking about. Chen shook her head, arms crossed. "She humiliated us, on purpose. That wasn't leadership, that was a show," she said bitterly. Stevens didn't say much. He just sipped his coffee, jaw tight, the kind of anger that didn't need words anymore. Meanwhile, others stood apart. Officer Delaney, who'd never raised her voice above a whisper in 6 years, had started asking questions in the halls about body cam policy, about community board proposals. Detective Hargrove, known for keeping his distance from internal politics, had started spending more time in the administration wing, offering quiet nods to Chief Johnson. Change was in the air, and not everyone feared it. Officer Dave Miller stood awkwardly between these factions. The same men who used to slap his back at the end of a long shift now looked at him with suspicion. Chen had even told him not so jokingly, "Careful, Miller, you're starting to sound like her." But something in him had already shifted. After the one-on-one with Chief Johnson, after looking her in the eye and hearing the story of her brother, silence no longer felt like safety. It felt like betrayal. By mid-morning, tensions finally burst open during a roll call meeting. A supervisor read out the week's assignments, and someone, no one knew who, loudly muttered, "Guess you better check with the TV chief first." The room froze. Sarah wasn't present, but her presence loomed in every corner of that space. Miller stood up slowly, heart racing. "We don't have to agree with everything," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "But at some point we have to admit what we saw on that video, that wasn't fake. That wasn't edited. We all know it could have been any one of us standing there, treating her like she didn't belong." No one clapped, no one cheered, but no one interrupted him either. After the meeting, Miller found a post-it on his locker, "Snitch," in capital letters, black marker. He took it down without a word, folded it once, threw it in the trash. Then he made a decision, one that would change everything. He grabbed his binder, full of notes from old shift reports and department incident logs, and he walked, calm, certain, toward Chief Johnson's office. He didn't knock. He walked in and placed the binder on her desk. Sarah looked up, surprised. Miller's voice didn't shake this time. "I've been keeping track," he said, "for years." Sarah opened the binder slowly. Inside were photocopies of incident reports, complaint forms, even screenshots of internal emails that had quietly circulated for years. Each one a red flag, each one dismissed, buried, or marked resolved without action. There were pages on use of force incidents involving Officer Stevens, many with consistent language: suspect non-compliant, verbal escalation, minor injuries, and patterns, complaints disproportionately filed by Black and Latino residents, nearly all of them withdrawn or inconclusive. Miller sat across from her, eyes steady. "I didn't know what to do with it before. Honestly, I was scared. Stevens has friends upstairs. HR never took it seriously, but now, with everything happening, I thought maybe it's time someone saw the whole picture." Sarah nodded, flipping through the evidence, her face unreadable. But inside, something stirred. Confirmation of what she had suspected, but more than that, proof that the rot wasn't just cultural. It was documented, preserved, and it had a paper trail. She looked up. "Do you realize what this means?" Miller nodded. "Yeah, it means we're not crazy." "No," she said quietly. "It means we have leverage." She didn't smile. She reached for her phone. It's time this left the building. Sarah didn't call the mayor. She didn't loop in the city manager. She went straight to the state attorney general's office. She sat in her office, blinds drawn, voice steady as she spoke to Deputy Attorney General Linda Morales on a secure line. Morales listened in silence as Sarah outlined what she had uncovered. Years of misconduct, coordinated silence, patterns of racial targeting. When Sarah mentioned Stevens's name, there was a long pause on the other end of the call. "We've had whispers about him," Morales said finally, "but no one from inside has ever brought us this much detail." "I'm bringing it now," Sarah replied. "Officially, I'm requesting a formal investigation." Morales's voice turned sharper. "Are you prepared for what that means? If you file this, if we act on it, it's not going to stay quiet. You'll have enemies, internal and external." "I already do," Sarah said calmly. "This department's reputation is already on the line. I'm trying to salvage what's left of it." A beat of silence. Then Morales said, "Send everything, today." "I will," Sarah replied. She hung up, slid the binder into an envelope, and sealed it with quiet finality. War was coming, but this time she wouldn't be fighting alone. The leaks began the next morning. Local news outlets buzzed with anonymous tips, files, complaints, body cam omissions. Reporters from Riverside Gazette and Channel 6 News ran pieces questioning the integrity of the department, pointing fingers at past cases that had mysteriously disappeared from public record. One name kept surfacing: Officer Mike Stevens. Sarah sat at her desk, watching the headlines roll in. Each article peeled back another layer: civil suits that were settled quietly, dashcam footage that never made it to trial, an internal affairs officer who had resigned under pressure. It wasn't just Stevens, it was a pattern, a system. But someone on the inside was fighting back. The police union released a vague but pointed statement defending officers from unfounded attacks and warning against politically motivated leadership. Flyers appeared in the locker room overnight. "Back the badge, not the politician." She knew who was behind it. Stevens had his people. But so did she now. Miller slipped into her office with a flash drive. "This one's worse," he said. She took it. "They're panicking," he added. "Good," Sarah whispered. "That means the truth is finally making them uncomfortable." She looked out the window, jaw clenched. This was only the beginning. By late afternoon, the department felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. In the hallway, conversation stopped when Sarah passed. Some officers stood when she entered the room, others refused to meet her gaze. The silence had weight now. Not the respectful kind, but the kind that follows a storm warning. When she stepped into the break room, Stevens was already there, laughing loudly with a small circle of loyalists. He didn't flinch when he saw her. In fact, he smiled. "Chief," he said coolly, sipping his coffee, "you've made quite the splash in the media today." Sarah stared at him, her posture calm but unshakable. "Truth tends to make waves, Officer Stevens." His smile didn't fade. "You're undermining morale." "I'm exposing misconduct," she corrected. "And if morale suffers because of that, then morale was built on silence." He stood slowly, stepping in closer. "You don't understand how this place works. You think outside pressure will fix us? All it'll do is divide us." She took a breath. "It's already divided." The tension was electric. For a split second, the room stood still. No footsteps in the hall, no clicking keyboards, just the thick air of unspoken war. Stevens leaned in. "You think the community's gonna side with you over cops they've known for decades?" Sarah didn't blink. "They already are." She walked past him, not giving him the dignity of a second glance. Outside the room, her phone buzzed again. Another email. Subject line: "Attorney General launches formal inquiry into Riverside Police Department." She forwarded it to the mayor, then to the city council. She walked straight into her office, closed the door, and exhaled, long and slow. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened a drawer and pulled out a photo of her brother Marcus. She placed it beside her nameplate on the desk. "This is for you," she murmured. Then she stood, turned toward the window, and watched as reporters began setting up across the street. The walls were cracking, and the truth was no longer waiting at the door. It was walking straight through it. It started with a knock on Sarah Johnson's office door at 7:32 a.m. sharp. No appointment, no warning, just two men in dark suits flashing FBI credentials. "Chief Johnson?" She rose from her desk slowly, her spine straight, her eyes steady. "Yes," she replied. One of them stepped forward and extended his ID. "Special Agent Lewis, this is Agent Ramirez. We're here on behalf of the Department of Justice. As of this morning, the U.S. Attorney's Office has opened a civil rights inquiry into the Riverside Police Department." Sarah didn't blink. She nodded, as though she had been expecting this moment all along, and in a way, she had. The moment she walked past Officer Stevens in that parking lot, the moment she sat in front of the cameras and told the country the truth, they had all been breadcrumbs leading here. "Come in," she said. They got to work without ceremony. A third agent arrived 20 minutes later and was stationed in the records division. A fourth joined internal affairs. A fifth, a tech specialist, set up a temporary workstation in a side office near dispatch. USB drives were plugged in, printers ran non-stop, passwords were reset. The hum of bureaucracy was different now. It had teeth. Sarah gave them everything they asked for: personnel files, use of force reports, internal disciplinary records, access to body cam archives, the citizen complaints Miller had recovered, the anonymized list of officers flagged for misconduct patterns. She didn't redact a word, didn't withhold a name, didn't sugarcoat a single statistic, because she didn't fear what they would find. She feared what would happen if they didn't come at all. As the hours passed, word spread through the station. Something big was happening. Whispers turned into silence. Laughter died in the hallways. Officers who once barked orders now whispered nervously. Desks that were loud with gossip became graveyards of quiet tension. By lunchtime, the old guard started grumbling. "What is this, a witch hunt?" one muttered. "More like a purge," another replied darkly. But not everyone was afraid, not everyone was hiding. Younger officers leaned in. Recruits who'd just passed probation showed up early the next day, starched and quiet. Even a few veterans, like Officer Ramos from patrol, walked into the interview room with their heads held high and told the truth about Stevens' manipulation and the culture of fear that had paralyzed them for years. Others, though, closed ranks. One detective, Miller said his name was Harper, refused to speak without union counsel. Another called out sick for the entire week. A third submitted a sudden vacation request that just happened to align perfectly with the DOJ's initial investigation window. And then there was the car. Sarah walked into the lot late Thursday evening, having stayed after hours to help federal agents finish paperwork. Her silver sedan sat beneath a single yellow parking light. From a distance, she noticed something strange. The glare of the overhead light reflected unevenly on the driver's side panel. When she got closer, her stomach tightened. A long, jagged scratch ran from her rear bumper all the way to the edge of the driver's door. Deep, angry, deliberate. No note, no message, just the ugly, childish signature of resentment. The end, and they... She stared at it in silence. For a moment, she considered calling it in, getting the security footage, filing a report. But then she took a breath. She unlocked the door, tossed her bag into the passenger seat, and drove off toward the evening community town hall she'd promised to attend. Because retaliation was expected. Cowardice was predictable. But her silence? That would never be part of the plan. By the end of the week, Riverside felt less like a police station and more like a chessboard. Every move, every glance, every whispered conversation held weight. The quiet buzz of the FBI's presence changed everything. One by one, names began to fall. It started with Officer Harris, a patrol cop with 8 years on the force. He was placed on administrative leave after records revealed a pattern of unreported stop-and-frisk incidents, all targeting Black and Latino teenagers. No body cam footage, no citations, no reports. Then came Detective Crowley. Suspended. His name appeared in several leaked complaints, many tied to coercive interrogation tactics and illegal searches that never made it to court, but cost families their dignity. And then it happened, what everyone had been waiting for. On Monday morning, just after roll call, Sergeant Stevens walked into the station as if nothing had changed. He nodded at a few officers, smirked at Miller, and poured himself a cup of stale coffee from the break room. But before he could take a sip, 2 federal agents flanked him. Sergeant Daniel Stevens. He turned, cup still in hand. "You're being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a federal investigation into civil rights violations and departmental misconduct. Please surrender your badge and service weapon." Silence fell across the room like a curtain drop. Stevens stood frozen. His hand trembled slightly as he placed the cup on the counter. He looked around, searching for an ally, a friendly face, someone, anyone who would step forward and defend him. No one moved. Miller stood nearby, his jaw set. He didn't gloat, he didn't smirk, he just watched. Stevens looked at him for a long, bitter moment, then slowly reached into his belt, unhooked his badge and placed it on the table. Next came his gun. He didn't say a word as they walked him out. A few hours later, Lieutenant Chen was next. She didn't wait for the agents to come to her. She marched directly into the chief's office and slammed a file on the desk. Her face was red, her voice shaking. "This is political," she snapped. "This is revenge." Sarah didn't rise from her chair. She didn't argue. She opened the file, read the contents, and closed it just as calmly. "You're entitled to your opinion, Lieutenant, but these facts don't lie." Chen stared at her. "You'll destroy this department." "No," Sarah said softly. "You already did. I'm just picking up the pieces." That afternoon, Chen was suspended pending further review. The FBI would dig deeper. Her decisions during officer-involved shootings, her approval of questionable tactics, her repeated failure to discipline those who abused power, none of it would stay buried now. And with Stevens and Chen gone, a vacuum opened. The mayor wasted no time filling it with blame. At a hastily arranged press conference outside City Hall, Mayor Roberts stood behind a podium flanked by advisors. His tie was too tight, his voice too calm, but the bitterness beneath his words was unmistakable. "This chaos," he began, "is not the result of one incident. It is the consequence of a culture of division stoked by certain individuals more interested in media attention than institutional unity." Reporters glanced at each other. One raised her hand. "Are you referring to Chief Johnson?" Roberts hesitated, then gave a small, practiced nod. "The chief's recent choices have escalated tensions within our law enforcement community and eroded public trust." Sarah watched it live from the corner of her office, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't flinch, but the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. The betrayal didn't surprise her, but it still cut deep. That night, something remarkable happened. The city council met for an emergency closed-door session. Word had spread that the mayor planned to introduce a motion to formally censure Sari on grounds of departmental disruption and failure to maintain unity. But when the council emerged, their decision took everyone by surprise. Councilwoman Reyes took the mic first. Her voice was firm, her conviction clear. "We do not censure those who expose the truth," she said. "We commend them." Another council member, a retired educator named Ben Holloway, stepped forward. "What's happening here is painful but necessary. The rot didn't start with Chief Johnson, but maybe, finally, it can end with her." Cheers erupted from the crowd gathered outside. And Sarah? She watched from her office window, silent, steady, holding back tears. In the weeks that followed, the department felt different. Not fixed, not healed, but different. Younger recruits, fresh from academy, began to appear in the halls, wide-eyed, alert, respectful. They were hired through a new process emphasizing community experience, cultural sensitivity, and clean records. Sarah made time to meet each one. She looked them in the eyes and said the same thing. This badge means something again, don't forget that. And for the first time since she stepped into that building, Sarah Johnson felt like she wasn't alone in the fight. Change was no longer a dream, it had begun. The community center buzzed with a nervous kind of energy. Folding chairs scraped across the floor as neighbors, elders, and families poured into the hall, some clutching their coats, others clutching frustration that had long gone ignored. Flyers reading, "Town Hall with Chief Johnson open to all," were taped to the glass doors, the windows, and even a few street lamps outside. The sun was just starting to set, casting a golden hue through the dusty blinds. The air inside felt heavier, charged with anticipation, skepticism, and cautious hope. Sarah stood near the front, in uniform, no podium, no barrier, just a circle of chairs. She had insisted on that. No stage, no distance. She didn't want to talk at the people. She wanted to talk with them, and, more importantly, to listen. That was the part most people in power skipped. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah said, scanning the crowd. Her voice wasn't booming, it was steady, sincere. "Tonight isn't about me talking. It's about hearing from you." For a moment, no one moved. Then a hand went up, then another. One by one, voices began to fill the room, not shouting, but releasing. A man in his 60s, bald with a weathered face, stood up. His name was Mr. Calvin Tate. "My grandson was stopped last year," he said, his voice trembling. "Didn't do nothing, just walking home from work. Cops slammed him on the hood like he was a threat. He still won't go near this building." People nodded, others murmured softly. Sarah listened, hands clasped in front of her, eyes locked on his. A young woman spoke next. She held her daughter in her lap. "When I saw what happened to you in that video," she said, "I cried, because I saw my husband in your place. I saw what could have happened to him if the camera wasn't rolling. You were the chief, and they still treated you like that." Another woman rose, this one older, wearing a church hat with a gold cross pin on her coat. Her voice rang with quiet power. "For the first time," she said, pausing to let her words land, "it feels like someone's listening." The room grew still. Sarah swallowed hard. She wasn't here to cry, but that one hit her. She nodded slowly. "I hear you," she said, "and I'm not going anywhere." More hands went up. Stories came out like rainfall. Years of silence cracking open. Tales of sons wrongly accused, daughters frisked without cause, families forced to bury their dignity just to stay alive. No yelling, no fists raised, just truth, raw, heavy, long-denied truth. Sarah took notes, she asked follow-up questions, she never once interrupted. When a white man in a maintenance uniform stood to speak, the tension rose again. "I know I'm not the face most folks expect to see here," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "but I saw that video too, and it shook me. That's not the Riverside I want. I don't have the same experience as y'all, but I want to be part of fixing it." There was silence again, then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another. A few nods. Some still didn't trust him, but the room didn't explode. It held. It breathed. For 90 minutes the meeting went on. There were no cameras, no press, just people, pain, and possibility. And at the end of it, when Sarah finally spoke again, it wasn't to give a speech. It was just one promise. "We're not just rebuilding a department," she said softly. "We're rebuilding trust, and that starts right here." The next morning, the headlines were brutal. Conservative media outlets ran with it immediately. "Radical Chief Johnson holds race-baiting town hall," one blared. Another said, "Police chief undermines department morale with divisive rhetoric." On cable news, a panel of commentators, none of whom had attended the meeting, accused her of stirring unrest, of being soft on crime, of humiliating good officers for political gain. Inside the department, it hit like a wave. Tension snapped through the halls as if someone had rewired the building overnight. The police union wasted no time. By mid-morning, a public statement was released. "Our officers are under siege. They are risking their lives daily, and to face vilification from their own leadership is a betrayal. The statement didn't mention the video. It didn't mention the investigation. It certainly didn't mention the suspended officers under review for civil rights violations. It just framed everything through one lens: that Sarah Johnson was the problem. Stevens, though suspended, still had influence. His loyalists were active, whispering behind closed doors, fueling resentment, and leaking selective stories to sympathetic media figures. It wasn't direct insubordination, but it was insidious. Some officers walked by her office with stony expressions, while others no longer made eye contact. But not everyone was buying it. Miller had changed. He didn't say it often, but Sarah saw it in how he walked now. Upright, unapologetic. He took meetings with community leaders. He asked the younger officers real questions, not just protocol but ethics. One afternoon, after reading yet another inflammatory op-ed labeling her a threat to traditional policing, Sarah walked into the squad room and found Miller standing with 5 officers around a whiteboard. He was mapping out a community engagement plan. Voluntary ride-alongs, but only after implicit bias training, he was saying, and we have to follow up with feedback surveys from the residents, not just ticking boxes, real accountability. When he saw her, he nodded once. "Chief." She nodded back, keeping her face neutral, but inside something cracked open, a flicker of validation. It wasn't a revolution. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Outside, things were changing too. Supporters of reform began writing letters to the editor, pushing back against the spin. Local churches organized prayer walks. A group of high school students made posters that read, "We see you, Chief," and taped them to the precinct's windows. Still, the backlash hurt. Sarah watched as certain council members, under pressure, started to distance themselves. Mayor Roberts, ever the political survivalist, floated a plan to form a neutral oversight panel made up of business leaders, none of whom had law enforcement experience or community ties. It was a way to quiet the public without making any real change. Sarah refused to endorse it. At a press conference, she calmly said, "We cannot rebuild trust without involving the people whose trust was broken." That same night, the union president went on television, accusing her of playing identity politics. It didn't surprise her, but what did surprise her was how many citizens called the station afterward to voice their support. One woman's voicemail stood out. Her voice cracked with emotion as she said, "I'm white. I've lived here my whole life. I never realized how bad it was for others until I saw what they did to you. Please, don't back down. We're with you." Sarah sat in her office alone that night, listening to that message 3 times. She didn't cry, but she closed her eyes and breathed in deeply, steadying herself. The winds were shifting, but the storm wasn't over. Miller's transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. He had once kept his head down, told himself it wasn't his fight, but now he walked with a quiet conviction that hadn't been there before. The day after the town hall, he knocked on Sarah's door, not as a subordinate, but as someone with purpose. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing down at a worn notebook in his hand, "about how we engage with the community and how we failed them." Sarah looked up from her desk. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Officer Miller." He shook his head. "This isn't about proving, it's about repairing." He told her he'd spoken with a few officers, some of them young, disillusioned, but open. He'd started weekly discussions in the break room. Not mandatory, just honest. They talked about why they joined, what scared them, and what they didn't know about the people they were supposed to protect. One of the rookies had said, "I never even knew the neighborhood I patrolled, never thought to ask their names." Miller asked Sarah for one thing, to let him be the department's liaison to the community. "You've already started the bridge," he said. "Let me help build it." Sarah didn't hesitate. "You're it." He nodded once, then left, leaving the notebook behind. She opened it later. Inside were scribbled ideas, raw and unpolished, but all rooted in one word, circled over and over: trust. And for the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself a quiet smile. The news broke at dawn. A press release from the State Attorney General's office hit the wire, short and clinical in tone but explosive in impact. Officers Nathan Stevens and Derek Chen have been formally indicted for federal civil rights violations stemming from documented misconduct, including racial profiling, unlawful detention, and obstruction of justice. Sarah Johnson stood in the back of the press conference room, arms folded behind her back. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The justice system had finally spoken, and this time it hadn't whispered. It had roared. Stevens was arrested at home before sunrise. A quiet suburb, a wide driveway, and the kind of house with a flagpole out front and trimmed hedges that used to say "Model Citizen." This morning it said something else. He emerged in a wrinkled t-shirt and pajama pants, hands cuffed behind his back, mouth tight, eyes defiant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. This was the same officer who once claimed Sarah didn't belong on the station floor, who had raised his voice in the briefing room, who had whispered lies behind closed doors. Now, it was his name in the headlines. Chen, meanwhile, surrendered quietly. No cameras caught it, no officers paraded him, but the statement was just as damning. His history had finally caught up with him. Past traffic stops, complaints buried in desk drawers, body cam footage once lost but now miraculously found, all of it resurfaced like old ghosts, refusing to stay buried. The indictments weren't flashy. They didn't include the word assault or hate crime, but they hit where it hurt. Federal civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and gross dereliction of duty. And with that came real consequences. Internal Affairs stripped both men of their badges. The pension boards, under mounting public scrutiny, voted unanimously to revoke their retirement benefits. For men like Stevens and Chen, who once believed the department was theirs to rule, it was a fall that cut deeper than any jail cell could. No titles, no pensions, no quiet exit, only shame. And then came the sentencing. In an unusual but highly publicized plea deal, both men pleaded guilty. In exchange for avoiding jail time, they were sentenced to 1,500 hours of court-mandated community service, specifically, serving at organizations focused on civil rights education and racial reconciliation. The choice was deliberate. The court could have handed down traditional punishment, but the judge, an older black woman who had clearly read the full scope of the case, decided differently. She said, quote, "It's easier to deny and easier to blame, but to stand by the truth and take the law is the good and generous thing to do, and blame is the only course of action left in the law by the... You enforced laws you didn't respect," she said, locking eyes with Stevens as he stood in court. "Now, you will serve the communities you tried to erase." Stevens flinched, just slightly, but he nodded. Sarah didn't attend the sentencing hearing in person. She watched from her office, with the door closed, the blinds half drawn. When the gavel fell, she didn't cheer, she didn't cry. She just whispered something under her breath, something only she could hear. Then she turned off the screen. But outside that room, the city erupted. The news spread fast, igniting fires across social media, radio, and television. Some people called the punishment too light, others called it progress. Local activists clashed on talk shows, debating whether community service was enough for years of abuse and silence. At a coffee shop downtown, a young black barista named Tasha wiped down tables while the TV blared overhead. She paused, watched Stevens in cuffs, then smiled faintly. "Took long enough," she muttered to herself. An older white man at the counter shook his head. "Still got off easy," he said, folding up his newspaper. "If they looked different, they'd be in prison." In neighborhoods across Riverside, families gathered that night at dinner tables to talk about what justice really looked like. Parents explained the headlines to their children. Teenagers debated it in school cafeterias. Church elders reflected on how many times they'd seen change come close, then slip away. But not this time. Because this time, something felt different. This time, it wasn't just about punishing two bad officers. It was about a system being cracked open. The cracks were still fresh, still jagged, but they were there. And through them, sunlight poured in. At a local elementary school, a young girl raised her hand in class and asked her teacher, "Can a police chief be a girl who looks like me?" The teacher smiled, placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded. And across the city, dozens of other little girls, black, brown, white, began to imagine new answers to old questions. The mayor struck back quickly. 2 days after the indictments, Mayor Roberts stood at the podium inside City Hall, his expression grave, his words sharpened to cut. Cameras flashed as he declared that the chaos within Riverside Police Department has reached unacceptable levels, and that new leadership may be necessary to restore order. It wasn't subtle. It was a direct attempt to fire her. Sarah watched the broadcast from her office, hands clasped tightly in front of her. She had expected this. Roberts had tried to silence her from the beginning. He called accountability division. He called sunlight chaos. And now, with Stevens and Chen gone, he was desperate to keep control of the narrative. That night, the city council convened in an emergency session. The meeting lasted 4 tense hours, with heated debate and testimony from both the mayor and Sarah. Roberts argued that she had politicized the department, that she was undermining officer morale. He framed himself as the protector of public stability. When it was Sarah's turn, she stood tall, her voice calm but unyielding. "The mayor calls this chaos," she said. "I call it cleaning up a mess that should have been dealt with years ago. If leadership means silence, then I don't want it. If leadership means truth, then I stand exactly where I should be." The chamber fell silent. When the vote came, the result was decisive. 5 in favor of retaining Chief Sarah Johnson, 2 against. The mayor's motion failed. Outside the council chamber, the crowd waiting on the steps erupted in cheers. Sarah didn't smile as she walked out into the night air. She didn't wave. She simply whispered to herself, "We're not done." Because the reckoning wasn't just about Riverside, it was about what would come next. News of Riverside spread beyond city limits. What began as a local scandal had now become a national story. Media outlets across the country replayed the viral video of Sarah being confronted in the parking lot, followed by footage of Stevens in handcuffs. Commentators debated her reforms, her leadership, and what her fight meant for policing in America. Requests poured in. Community organizers wanted her to speak at rallies. Universities wanted her to guest lecture. Civil rights groups asked her to join panels. But one invitation stood apart from the rest: the National Police Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. It wasn't just another meeting, it was the stage where chiefs, commissioners, and law enforcement leaders from across the country gathered to set the tone for the future. Sarah accepted. When she walked into the conference hall, rows of uniforms and suits turned toward her. Some looked curious, others skeptical, a few already hostile. But when she reached the podium, the room fell into a hush. She didn't open with data. She didn't begin with politics. She began with a story. "My brother Marcus wore this uniform. He believed in the badge, but he lost his career because he told the truth. He chose integrity, and the system punished him for it." Her voice didn't waver. "We say we serve the public, but who are we really serving if officers like Stevens and Chen thrive while officers like Marcus are pushed out?" A ripple moved through the audience. Chiefs shifted in their chairs. Some nodded slowly. "This isn't just Riverside's problem," Sarah continued. "This is America's problem. And it will only change if we choose to change it." The auditorium was massive. Its polished wooden floors gleamed beneath the soft stage lights, and the backdrop displayed the official seal of the National Association of Law Enforcement Leaders. Rows upon rows of uniforms filled the seats, shoulder patches from every state. silver and gold badges catching the light like a sea of reflections. Some leaned forward, curious. Others leaned back, skeptical. The buzz in the room wasn't loud, but it pulsed with tension. This wasn't a routine keynote. They all knew who was walking out next. When Sarah Johnson stepped onto the stage, the silence was sudden and absolute. She wore her dress blues, 4 stars on her collar, every ribbon, every bar on her chest earned. There was no music, no applause, no flashy intro, just her, a black woman from Riverside, a former Army MP, a department leader who walked through fire and didn't just survive, it changed the entire structure around her. She looked out at the crowd, steady. Her voice was clear, calm, but every syllable landed like a declaration. "You don't know me personally," she said, "but I think you know what I represent." She paused. The stillness grew heavier. "A year ago, I walked into my own station and was almost arrested. Not for breaking the law, not for misconduct, not even for insubordination. I was nearly arrested for being a black woman in the wrong outfit on the wrong morning, and the people who tried to detain me worked for me. They just didn't know it yet." A few people shifted in their chairs. Someone let out an audible breath. She didn't flinch. "I didn't go public to shame them. I didn't speak out to make a name for myself. I did it because silence is what allowed it. Because my brother left this field years ago after doing the right thing, and I wasn't about to let his sacrifice be the last chapter." She clicked a remote. A screen behind her lit up with a slide showing before and after statistics. Citizen complaints down 48%. Use of force incidents down 35%. Officer retention among women and people of color had doubled. Public trust scores, collected from surveys around Riverside, were at a historic high. "This is what change looks like," she said. "It's slow, it's painful, but it's possible." She didn't brag, she didn't scold, she just stood there and told the truth. And for the first time all morning, the room erupted into applause. Sarah stepped off the stage, to the echo of applause still ringing in her ears. But her face remained composed. She nodded politely to those who approached her, shook a few hands, offered brief but sincere thanks, and then, as the room shifted to prepare for the next speaker, she quietly slipped into a side hallway, away from the crowd, away from the lights. Her heart was still steady, but her mind was already turning, thinking about Riverside, about the recruits, about the weight of what came next. That's when her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen. The name that flashed across it made her stop cold. Marcus. She hadn't heard from her brother in weeks, not since the indictments, not since she'd been pulled into a storm of national headlines and speaking engagements. She hesitated for a second, then answered. His voice came through calm but heavy with meaning. "I saw it," he said. "Your speech, all of it." Sarah's throat tightened. She turned her back to the hallway, leaning against the cool concrete wall like she needed its strength to stay upright. "I didn't think you'd be watching," she said softly. There was a pause. Then Marcus let out a low breath. "You did what I couldn't," he said. "You didn't just stand up. You stayed. Even when they tried to break you. Even when they tried to erase you." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked the tears back. She didn't want him to hear her cry. Not yet. "You gave me the blueprint," she whispered. "I just followed it." "No," he said gently. "You built the house." They were quiet for a moment, both of them holding something sacred between them. Not just family history, not just shared pain, but a deep understanding of what it means to carry a legacy built on both defiance and grace. "I'm proud of you, sis," Marcus added. "I hope you know that." Sarah nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I do now." And then, before either of them could say more, a knock echoed down the hallway. One of her aides stood at the far end, motioning to her. Time to return. More hands to shake, more questions to answer. She took one last breath, let it settle deep in her chest. "I gotta go," she told Marcus. "I know," he replied, Just keep going. We need you." She hung up, tucked the phone into her pocket, and stood up straighter. She wasn't just leading Riverside anymore. She was leading by example. For every officer who had ever stayed silent out of fear, and for every black child who dreamed of wearing a badge without being betrayed by it. And she wasn't done yet. Back in Riverside, the air felt different. It wasn't just the headlines or the reforms. It was the way people looked at the uniform now, less with fear, more with expectation, a challenge, a promise, something earned, not assumed. Sarah stood at the front of the new academy classroom, dressed in her pressed uniform, 4 stars gleaming under the overhead lights. Before her sat 20 recruits, all eyes forward. Some were nervous, some wide-eyed. 1 or 2 looked like they still weren't sure why they were there, but all of them were listening. She scanned the room until her gaze landed on a young black woman in the second row, barely 20, hair in a tight bun, back ramrod straight, eyes fierce and steady. The girl raised her hand. "Chief Johnson," she said, "can I ask you something?" Sarah nodded. "Go ahead." The girl paused, glancing briefly at her classmates before locking eyes again with the chief. "How did you stay so calm that day in the parking lot, when they didn't know who you were?" The room went still. Sarah held the silence for a beat, not to make them wait, but to honor the weight of the question. Then she stepped forward, her voice low and unwavering. "Because I knew who I was," she said, "and they didn't." She let that settle, moving her eyes across each recruit. They saw what they expected to see, not what was real, and if I had let their ignorance define me, I'd be standing here today as a warning, not a leader. The girl nodded slowly. Others leaned forward. Sarah continued, "Wearing this badge doesn't make you powerful. It doesn't make you right. It means you've chosen to serve. And if you don't know who you are when you put it on, someone else will decide it for you." One of the recruits in the back raised his hand. "What if we're scared?" She smiled softly. "Good. You should be. Fear means you understand the weight of the job. Just don't let it stop you from doing what's right." She stepped back, letting the lesson hang in the air like oxygen. In that moment, they weren't just recruits. They were the next line, the next test, and hopefully the next change. Sarah glanced once more at the young woman in the second row, saw the quiet determination in her eyes, and knew the future was watching, and it was ready. Later that night, Sarah stood alone in her office. The lights were off except for the glow of the parking lot outside, that same lot where everything had started, where she had been dismissed, doubted, threatened. Now it was quiet, peaceful. She walked through the glass doors, no one stopping her, no one questioning her. Her badge caught the moonlight as she passed beneath the street lamp. For the first time, she didn't have to announce who she was. The silence honored her, dignity intact, power earned. She walked into the night not to escape, but to lead.